Tonight, national security risks. New questions over the president's handling of classified material as the former president, embroiled in his own document scandal, speaks out to CBN News.
It would be nice if all the investigations could stop.
Plus,
Jesus is the Savior of the world.
God's work persists in Hong Kong.
God doesn't change. His message doesn't change. His church doesn't change.
And a warning over today's super potent pot.
If you smoke marijuana again, there's a chance that you don't come out of psychosis.
All this and more on Faith Nation. Parallel investigations into a former and current president, raising national security concerns. Welcome to Faith Nation. From our studio in Washington, I'm Abigail Robertson. Two investigations over one major issue: presidents and their handling of classified documents. The discovery of such records at President Biden's home and former office, as well as the home of former President Trump, raises a number of questions, ranging from whether the overall management of this sensitive material is flawed to whether these are instances of user error. Either way, answers are needed. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke brings us tonight's top story.
Abigail, ironically, the Biden administration National Security Council issued a review of the classification system over the summer. Considered to be ongoing, it's meant to examine ways to overhaul the process of determining and managing sensitive information.
I think both parties could agree that classification is way overused in Washington, D.C. There's so much information that the American people should have that they don't.
Former Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates served as an archivist for Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. She tells CBN News that while changes do need to be made to the classification system, many people regularly deal with sensitive material without making the mistakes we've seen recently.
There's a narrative going around that this is sort of the dirty little secret. Everybody knows it happens. Well, that's not true. The vast majority of the folks who have the clearances and the access to this material treat it with the respect that it deserves. And this is our national security. So I don't think anyone should be given a pass.
For example, the correct process for handling material like that found in Biden's possession would have involved separating out the classified documents at the end of his time in the Obama administration and returning them to the agency of origin.
So if you have a CIA analysis paper, you give it back to the CIA. And it's simply a case of keeping good records. And if then Vice President Biden had followed standard procedure, he would be deeding his vice presidential papers to an academic institution qualified to handle them.
Coates points out that none of Biden's personal attorneys involved with the recently discovered documents actually have the clearance to be handling them.
There are trained professionals both at the Department of Justice and the National Archives who hold the proper clearances. Biden himself has some lawyers, such as Bob Bauer, who has the requisite clearances. But for whatever reason, they're not the ones doing the searching.
She says that while details about the Justice Department's investigation into the documents can't be disclosed, the lack of transparency from the White House about the initial discovery of the material is concerning.
Nobody did anything to publicize it, obviously, before the election. But then the really problematic thing is that with that timeline is that they appear not to have undergone the secondary search until after it broke in the media. So that search should have happened in the days after they found the original documents to ensure that all of this material was properly handled. Instead, we had another 6 weeks of the box sitting in the garage when heaven knows who could have gone through it.
Coates warns that it will likely be months before any sort of report on the documents is released. And after more than a week of stonewalling everyone from lawmakers to the media, it's unlikely we'll get any new information from the White House on this either. Abigail?
Thanks, Caitlin. Now, former President Trump is embroiled in his own controversy over the handling of classified material. In August, the FBI raided his Mar-a-Lago home to get some 100 documents back after months of negotiations failed. In an interview with CBN's David Brody, the former president trying to make a distinction between his own scandal and that of the current president.
Obviously, it's a cover-up. Now I see that they have their classified documents sitting on the floor in a big pile in a garage someplace. And it's a big problem, I think, for them. I don't know. It would be nice if all the investigations could stop, because we're like investigation central in this country. Right. No country in the world has anything like this. You want to make America great again, and this nonsense is just, it never ends. But it's a problem. There's no question about it. He's got, and now they're saying there are many other places that he stored documents.
About 20 classified documents have been discovered at President Biden's home in Delaware and former office here in D.C. Now, joining us now to discuss this further is our very own chief political analyst, David Brody. David, thanks so much for being here today. So I first want to ask you, you just spoke with former President Trump on Monday, a big interview. So talk to us about President Trump's take on President Biden's documents scandal. Trump said he's hoping for an end to all investigations. How much of a gift is this to President Trump?
Yeah, it's the gift that actually could keep on giving at this point. We'll see what happens. I thought it was interesting when I asked him specifically, should Biden be prosecuted? He said, I don't want to get into that. So I thought it was a pretty tame response. He said, obviously, it's a cover-up. I kind of thought he would say that, but he didn't say anything about Biden actually being prosecuted for it, because obviously Donald Trump has his own legal issues. So, we'll see. But I thought it was interesting that he went to this idea about investigations, because he's right. I mean, everybody's being investigated left and right, and we know impeachment has become somewhat of a politicized weapon now. The Republicans want to impeach Biden on certain things. So I think he just wants all of the chaos to end. Donald Trump wanting chaos to end, amazing. So that's kind of where he's at.
And as the Republican presidential race gears up ahead of 2024, I thought this was interesting. The former president slammed evangelical leaders for, quote, disloyalty, meeting with other hopefuls. Let's take a listen to this.
That's a sign of disloyalty. There's great disloyalty in the world of politics, and that's a sign of disloyalty, because nobody, as you know, and you would know better than anybody because you do such a great job, nobody has ever done more for right to life than Donald Trump. I put 3 Supreme Court justices who all voted, and they got something that they've been fighting for 64 years, or many, many years. Right. And nobody thought they could win it. They won. Roe v. Wade, they won. They finally won.
Well, he is right that you do such a great job.
Well, please continue. No,
but Dave, I want to ask you, are evangelicals beholden to President Trump because of his pro-life stance?
I don't think they're beholden, and that's an important word. I don't think they're beholden. They're going to want to see how the field shapes, takes shape, and that makes sense. But at the same time, I think he has an underlying point here. I mean, evangelical leaders went with Donald Trump because he supported the policies that they wanted implemented, and he did all of that. So what has changed exactly? Well, you can say there's January 6th and there's impeachment and there's the chaos. But Donald Trump has always come with chaos. I mean, they supported him when there was chaos around him 4 years ago or so. So what has really changed? And so he's making the point like, look, I'm going to be there for you again. And if it was about policies then, why isn't it about policies now? I think he has an interesting point. It's going to make waves. It already has across the country.
Yeah. My last question. Notably, the former president stopped short of endorsing either the current RNC chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, or contender Harmeet Dillon to be the next chair of the Republican National Committee. Let's take a listen to what he's told you about that.
Well, I can honestly say I like both of them. I mean, I get along with both of them. I haven't taken a stance, let them fight it out.
So what do you make of former President Trump's fight it out approach?
Yeah, this is interesting because Donald Trump, when it comes to Ronna McDaniel, I kind of put her in the Kevin McCarthy bucket. Kind of an establishment, been around for a while, and yet Trump was with McCarthy. And I'm not that he's not with Ronna McDaniel, but he didn't endorse Harmeet Dillon. And remember, Harmeet Dillon is actually very close to Donald Trump. So I was a little bit surprised that he wouldn't go further in endorsing Harmeet Dillon. But he wants him to fight it out. Doesn't Donald Trump love a fight, right? Everybody fight it out. But I think the headline from that is that he did not endorse Ronna McDaniel. And the fact that he wouldn't endorse Ronna McDaniel is actually good news for Harmeet Dillon going forward. That vote, the head of the RNC chair, will be later this month.
Yeah. Well, David, great to have you here. Thank you
Great
for joining us and
Abby.
sharing your insights.
This is cool. All right.
Well, coming up, Christians are being targeted in Hong Kong, and the future of religious freedom hangs in the balance. We head there next on Faith Nation. Another round of extreme weather in California is flooding the coast, leaving some in the mountains buried in 30 feet of snow. Relentless rain has killed at least 19 people since late December. The most recent storm flooding homes and taking drivers by surprise, leading to several rescues and road closures near San Diego. Meanwhile, avalanches and mudslides are a constant threat throughout the state. President Biden is set to visit heavily impacted areas as winter weather moves west through the Rockies. Across the globe, more than 2 years have passed since China took control of Hong Kong. In 2020, the communist regime imposed a national security law giving Beijing broad new powers. Since then, dozens of human rights and religious freedom activists have been arrested, and tens of thousands have fled the city's authoritarian rule. As George Thomas reports from Hong Kong, those who remain face increasing repression.
David is from mainland China. He moved to Hong Kong a decade ago to reach Mandarin-speaking Chinese with the gospel. He had a sense back then that political changes were coming to the city and wanted to be ready.
I arrived in Hong Kong 10 years ago and saw a big demand among the Mandarin-speaking community. There were very few churches that were reaching this group with the good news of Christ.
We are concealing David's identity because of the sensitive nature of his Christian work. The majority of churches in Hong Kong are in Cantonese, the language widely spoken in the city.
Since Mandarin is my mother tongue, I knew it would be more convenient to reach this group in our soul language.
A few years after his arrival, he started a small home group made up of people from the mainland. The fellowship grew as he shared the gospel with no restrictions or fear of reprisal from Hong Kong authorities. Then came the 2019 pro-democracy protests, which suddenly altered Hong Kong's political and religious landscape. In 1997, Beijing agreed to govern Hong Kong under the one country, two system principle, and it was supposed to last for 50 years. All that changed when China decided to intervene a lot sooner. In response to the anti-China protests here, Beijing imposed a sweeping national security law that gave it new powers to punish critics and silence dissenters.
We were promised one country, two systems. Now we are one country, one system. We are not as free as before.
Dozens of pro-democracy activists, lawyers, and journalists have been arrested since the law took effect.
You cannot think about living in Hong Kong anymore. You should think about yourself living in China.
Among those arrested, Jimmy Lai, a devout Catholic and defender of human rights and religious freedom. Imprisoned for protesting, Lai could face life behind bars on separate national security charges. Also targeted, Hong Kong's most prominent Catholic leader, Cardinal Joseph Zen, an outspoken critic of China's Communist Party.
For us Christians, following Jesus means going through all kinds of trials and difficulties.
The security law continues to force many citizens to flee the city.
As a result, thousands of teachers have left Hong Kong. Thousands of students have left Hong Kong. In our own church, we have had over 300 members that have left.
Jesus is the Savior of the world. He is the only legitimate Savior.
American Butch Tanner pastors one of the few English-speaking congregations here. He says Hong Kong went from an open city to a city of fear the moment China stepped in.
So a lot of people who are locals will say, you have an international passport. You can leave anytime. I don't, so I need to leave when I can.
Once a regional beacon of freedom and democracy, Hong Kong is once again a colonial city, with China's authoritarian president calling the shots, such as declaring Beijing's full control over Hong Kong. In 2020, China's president picked his close ally Xiao Baolong to be Beijing's representative here in Hong Kong. Xiao is a well-known hardliner who has targeted China's underground Christian community. In fact, a few years ago, he launched a campaign that led to thousands of crosses demolished at churches. While the future of religious freedom hangs in the balance, Pastor David remains optimistic and sees more opportunities to share Christ's love. An unprecedented number of Mandarin-speaking people have moved here from the mainland since Beijing took over.
We've never had this many Mandarin-speaking people in the city before. You can hear them walking around on the streets and subways. It's a great time to reach them.
Pastor Tanner says despite political and security uncertainties, Hong Kong churches are united like never before and will continue to share a message of hope.
There is nothing, George, that's going to happen that's going to stop the church. Nothing. And it doesn't really matter whether the legal system changes or the education system changes or anything else changes. God doesn't change. His message doesn't change. His church doesn't change.
George Thomas, CBN News, Hong Kong.
More potent than ever before. When we come back, from mental illness to addictions, new warnings over the impact of weed. Welcome back. The high potency of today's marijuana has been directly linked to greater risk of mental illness and addiction. That has health experts on high alert. Medical reporter Lori Johnson spoke to one man who was hospitalized with psychosis due to weed and brings us this story on the dangers of the drug.
Zach Plant started using marijuana to ease the stress in his life.
Like, I would much rather be high than be sober.
Months later, he entered the hospital for cannabis-induced psychosis because his marijuana use led Zach to lose touch with reality while experiencing hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia.
I had, thoughts of other people wanting to hurt me, thoughts of the only way of, being safe was to end my own life.
While his symptoms didn't last, doctors gave Zach a warning.
If you smoke marijuana again, there's a chance that you don't come out of psychosis. You go back into it and your brain may never recover.
Up until about 20 years ago, most marijuana contained comparatively low levels of THC, the ingredient that makes users high. Now that concentration can be 10 times greater, 30% THC, and in some cases, much more.
You can go to a gas station now where I live, and you will find a vape pen that has, we call them carts or, dab pens. And it will have like 50 times the potency of just smoking regular marijuana.
New research shows today's high-potency marijuana can be directly linked to a greater risk of mental illness and addiction.
Marijuana-induced psychosis and marijuana-induced schizophrenia is the single most well-replicated finding in schizophrenia research today.
And this super strong pot is widely available.
The legal pot shops are dedicated to selling very potent products. The only caveat to that is that the drugs on the street can have fentanyl laced in on occasion, which is obviously can be fatal.
So far, 37 states have legalized medical marijuana. In 19 of those states, recreational use is also legal. All of this rakes in billions of tax dollars for those state and local governments. Senator Chuck Schumer wants this to go national and introduced legislation in July to federally decriminalize marijuana and establish a federal cannabis tax.
We are taking steps in the Senate to right the wrongs of the failed war on drugs.
Yet many believe we need to revive this battle now more than ever.
Legalizing or promoting marijuana is not a solution. It's a nightmare.
Aubrey Adams speaks from personal experience.
While I've witnessed THC psychosis in my own son, and my husband was hearing voices after using 24% THC flower.
The two tried it when it became legal in their home state of Colorado, not knowing how powerful it had become.
The THC content is increasing on purpose. The legal marijuana industry has to addict their users. So the more potent the product, the more risk they are of becoming addicted, just like the tobacco industry did.
Indeed, the CDC estimates 1/3 of today's pot users are addicted.
Probably the majority who are using daily are addicted because they're not just using once a day. Typically, they're using several times a day.
Which can interfere with normal life.
Can't get off work without doing it. Can't go into work without doing it.
Scientists say marijuana addiction can also hamper the development of children and young adults.
And interfere with them developing careers and completing degrees and things like that.
It's been 2 years since Zach suffered from marijuana-induced psychosis, and he's doing great. He's glad to be off the drug and recommends others steer clear of it too.
For me, it was detrimental, and I don't think anybody can really know if it will have that effect on them. And so it's very risky to do.
Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thanks, Lori. Well, coming up, proof that you're never too old to follow your dreams. Next on Faith Nation. Welcome back. A New York woman is officially a high school graduate. It just took her 100 years to get there. Pearl Newman grew up in the Spencerport Central School District, but was too busy working to finish school. After devoting years to her family and career, the centenarian finally received her diploma at her old high school.
Say, stand on your own 2 feet, you do anything you want to.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad I'm tickled pink. Yes, I am.
Well, this is your official diploma. You're welcome. High school. Well, I certainly would say that everything...
The school district presented Newman with her own school ID, and she will be included in a class of 2023 display at her now alma mater. Such a great story to end on. Well, that's going to do it tonight on Faith Nation. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.